Good evening, cheeky natives watching us on Facebook, watching us on YouTube and on Twitter. It's the cheeky natives, and today we're talking about hello, everyone. Welcome to another live discussion of the cheeky natives. I look forward to these live discussions because I get to see my girl Alma, and we always have like a special guest. So I'm always so excited about this. Hey, Alma.
Hi, how you doing? Hi, Shubnum, how are you? We're so excited.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I'm really honored.
So I suppose I have the special pleasure of introducing
Always.
you. So we are going to have a wonderful discussion about how Shubnum accidentally became a global stock photo and other strange and wonderful stories. This is her debut novel. It's not her debut novel, sorry. She is a South African author and artist. Her first novel was Onion Tears. Her debut was shortlisted for the Penguin Prize for African Writing and the University of Johannesburg's debut prize for writing in English. She holds a master's degree in English and has been selected for a number of literary fellowships, including, are you guys ready? The Octavia Butler Fellow at Jack Jones Literary Arts and as a Mellon Fellow at the Stellenbosch University. When not traveling, she lives in Durban and she's our guest for today. Welcome to the Cheeky Natives.
Thank you for having me.
So I think when I saw the cover of your book, I was like, oh my goodness, like, wow. This cover is like, wow. And then obviously I read the story behind the cover and I was like, oh my gosh. Like I thought it was like professionally taken, it was a thing, it was a whole idea. So I want you to tell our readers who may not know the story about the cover, about how the cover came about.
Yeah, so I took it on my birthday last year, which was in April, just when the pandemic started. And I think, we all were going through a lot. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what the future held. And I knew I wasn't going to see any of my friends or family on that day. And I guess I was feeling a bit down. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to make the most of this day, even though I don't feel good. And so I set up like a little photo shoot in one empty room. I put my mother's plants on the ground, my grandmother's chair. I wore my sister's old wedding dress, skirt, and my favorite jacket, and my favorite shoes, and a crown, and my sister's wedding tiara and earrings. And I thought, I'm just going to make the most of this day, even though I'm feeling like down. I'm just going to try to have fun. And I took the photos. I balanced the camera on like these paint tins and books. And I shared it in social media. And when we were getting ready to do this book, my publisher came to me and said, we saw this photo on your social media. Don't you want to use it as the cover? And I was hesitant because I said, I'm like in this big dress, I'm in the tiara, like, doesn't it seem like it's too much, And my sister was even like, why don't you Photoshop out the tiara just so it doesn't look like it's too much, but then they told me that they think it captures the spirit of the book, which is like a little crazy and a little bit like whimsical and a little bit, and it captures the spirit of trying to make the best of what you have. So when they explained it to me that way, I was like, okay, this sounds like it works. And so that's the little note I put in the beginning of the book, was that's how the cover came about. Like, it captures the spirit of the book, which is, even if a situation is bad, try to make the most of what you can with what you have. And that's kind of a lot of what the stories are about in the book, I think.
I love that you've spoken about the spirit of the book being a little bit whimsical and making the best of what you have. There's a magic that you refer to throughout the book without us giving too much away. And I think I'm just enchanted by the idea of magic, right? I think that in this period, we've all been a little bit we've had to become a little bit cynical. We've had to become a little bit less optimistic. There's been a lot of paranoia and fear. And there's a magic that you refer to throughout the book. So if you could just talk a little bit to the magic and why you felt like it was so important to have this theme woven throughout the book.
Yeah, I think I think that comes from, and I start off the book talking about like my childhood and reading a lot. So my grandfather would tell us stories, and I would be reading books, and my sister would be taking me to the local library, and it like inspired so much of feeling in me that there's so much to the world and anything can happen and adventure is out there. And I think like every child carries that in them, right? Like this idea like that, oh, the future, it's so wonderful and so many things are going to happen to me. And then like as you get older and things and life happens, like you forget that kind of like magic you carry in your chest. And so as I got older and like I'd face all these problems, like I wasn't allowed to travel, or wasn't, I was a girl and I came from a very like a small community, Muslim community, patriarchal community, and I was like, oh, I can't go and do these things and I want to do them and I forget. And so I'd have to like each stage in my life sort of like remember that. And so like there's one scene where I'm in New York and I'm looking up at the sky and it starts snowing and it's April, and this is my first time I've traveled alone. This is the first time I'm in New York. I'm like heartbroken, but I'm looking up at the sky and it's snowing, and it's so unbelievable to me that I can be standing here on the street and there's snow. And it gave me that little spark, and it reminded me of that thing we carry within us. And we all have it in us, but I really want the stories in this book to remind everyone that they have that in that little flame, and you just gotta like ignite it and light it and find it. And that's the magic, I think, that I talk about. And the more I think you seek it and the more you try to find it and light it, the more it keeps happening. And so I think the stories get a little more stranger and stranger because um I try to look at life as an adventure. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned it a little bit when you spoke about the magic. Very early in the book, you sort of introduce us to yourself and you introduce us to your childhood. But one story that I think stuck with me is how you're the last of four girls, and how instead of people necessarily congratulating your mom, what they did instead was saying, "Oh, better luck next time." And it got me thinking a little bit about like. Um, the idea of like Islam, patriarchy, progeny, and just I wanted you to speak a little bit about that, right? Just the idea of like how you entered into the world as like a better like next time because of the society in which you were brought into.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that's particularly because I'm a Muslim. Like, I'm going to say it has a lot to do with the culture. It's an Indian culture thing, particularly. But then, even when I talk about it, I hear from other cultures, no, 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 no. It's not only Indians, it's all over. If you need to have a boy, and if you don't have a boy, then there's something wrong. So, I mean, I talk about it from my perspective within my community. But I think this is, the boy baby thing is a story everywhere. So, yeah, when I was the fourth daughter, I always think about this about my family. I always think, even if they weren't, even if they didn't feel very strongly about it, I'm sure they would have wanted me to be a boy. After three girls, I mean, I'm sure they wanted me to have a boy. But my father always says, oh no, I didn't care. You were healthy, you had all your fingers and your toes, and I didn't mind. But I know, like within our family, extended family, like it was like a disappointment. She's disappointed. She's had another girl again. Like, I'm sure she wanted a boy. I'm sure they wanted a boy. So the title of the chapter is I was supposed to be a tragedy because I was the fourth girl in an Indian Muslim family. Like, I should have been tragedy. But by the end of the chapter, I talk about how within, at least in my own family, like growing up with so many girls was the best thing. And it's still the best thing in my life right now. And my parents loved having four girls. So for me, at the end of the chapter, I say I was supposed to be a tragedy, but I wasn't. And that's kind of the attitude I've taken in life. Like, people can tell you what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be boxed in this little box. Oh, you're a girl and you couldn't study properly and you kept falling out of art degrees and art degrees, or you can say, or you can try at least to do the best that you can with your situation and then say, no, I'm not a tragedy. Yeah.
I think that the idea of molding your situation, using your situation, is an interesting one that you explore in the book. And I think of it as it relates to identity. You are so you speak about being a single woman in a conservative community and what that means to have to locate your identity outside of all of these markers that people have put, right? So motherhood, being a wife, being partnered, sort of as markers of wholeness and identity. And then we see you in the book actually be very deliberate in the ways in which you go about in creating your own identity outside of those markers. And I'm interested in the interplay between creating that identity, but also in the very human yearning that you show in the book, right? So the very human desire to be partnered, the very human desire to be coupled, and I'm curious about that tension that you explored in the book so well.
Well,
I
look,
think
like when I sorry,
just
go.
to add on to what Alma is saying, because Alma and I had quite a lengthy discussion about this. I think also connected to that, there is also a yearning in the book that you explore. So existing outside of this framework, there's a yearning of companionship. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about that, right? About like forging your own identity, but also marrying that identity with the idea of wanting and yearning.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. Thank you for engaging with the work that way, and also for going for all the hard questions early. No, yeah, it's a hard thing to answer because when I started the book, I wanted to be as honest as possible. No, I'm lying. When I started the book, I was just going to write funny stories about all these funny things that happened to me. But when I actually was in the middle of the book, I realized I can't tell the story without showing the reader who I really am. Like I can't put you on this journey with me if I don't show you my face. If I don't show you that I'm scared of these things and I want these things and I hope for these things, I have to be vulnerable, right? To tell a true story, I have to be vulnerable. And I don't have easy answers, but like I want to show the interplay between things. So I want to talk about how there's all this pressure to be partnered with someone and to be married and to have kids in my culture and my religion. Like there's so much of pressure, but I also want to talk about how I want to do things on my own, and I also want to talk about how I do want those things also in my own way. And I mean that's that kind of interplay that you talk about. And so I thought if I just tell these stories as honestly as possible, talk about how people would say you need to be married, they'd pray for me, they make me go to all these holy people who will bless me and tell me what I need to the recitations I need to do to find a good husband, and how that frustrates me, but also how, like, if I'm walking on the street and I see two people holding hands and walking on the street, and I think I'm single for so long, I wonder what that feels like. I wonder what it must be like to wake up next to somebody too, because I'm also a romantic at heart. So it's strange saying this out in public, but anyway, yeah. It's important. It was just important to me to be honest. So I don't have the clear answers, but I want to give you the story, and in so opening the discussions about what does it mean to yearn and to want, but also to try to want to find your own path to that. Yeah.
I think what's also interesting is thinking about, where we are in the pandemic, because I think the pandemic sort of exasperates the yearning and the desires, right? But what also is connected to that is the story you sort of like, in sharing part of your heart, you introduce us to the story, and the chapter is called Heartbreak. But you sort of like, you're just like, I won't tell you what happened, but I'll tell you this is what happened. And I'm interested in that, right? I'm interested in I think in your book, there is a level of vulnerability that you allow, but you're saying, I will stop here. You're not, you can't enter here, and I don't want you to enter here. So I'm interested in that, in the stories that you went all out for and were vulnerable in, and in the stories where you decided, I can't share more of you than I already have.
I guess to connect that would be also the format of the book. I think the Tokonolo has touched on something really interesting. I think that memoirs or writing about yourself is deeply personal, but there's also an element of I guess being able to exert some sort of control, because you can choose what you put in and what you don't put in. So I guess just to add to the talking numbers question is to ask about why you chose to write the stories in the way that you did. So it's story selection, how you held back, and what you decided was important to include, but also I guess how you chose the format of the book, because this is very different from anything that you've written. You have done really well as a fiction writer, and now you do this part memoir, part travelogue, part love letter, and you then have to decide what you can put in and put out.
I think I'll separate the answer for them both. So I think for the question about like how I chose to put it out this in this structure, in this format, I struggled with that for a bit. So like I said, in the beginning, I just thought I was writing a collection of funny, hilarious stories. I'm not going to put anything deep in there. I'm a personal person. I'm not going to put my personal stories here about yearning to hold other people's hands and all that. I'm just going to put funny stories. But then Andrea Natras, my publisher, was like, why don't you go back to childhood and start looking for some stories? And so I started at childhood, and then I would find the most interesting stories from the beginning, and sort of like, so there was like the story, I almost drowned. Like that's a memory that sticks out for me when I nearly drowned. And then when I went to a fancy new high school stood out for me. And so any story from my life that kind of stood out for me, we went in an order from there, and we went in the order of like childhood, growing pains. Um, growing pains was like, problematic times in my 20s, and then being brave, trying to find that braveness at the end of my 20s. And I think a whole new world, when things started to change for me and my perspective on things started to change, my mind started to open up. And I think like the road ahead or something. So once we had those kind of headings, I could put the stories that fit in with them. So the problematic times, the difficult times, the time when I started getting soft. One of the most important sections there is on softness. And so finding the stories that I learned a softness within myself, and then when I had to be brave again. And that just helped with the structure of putting the stories together in terms of that. And in terms of what kind of stories I put in, I try to look for the most interesting stories. There were some stories I wanted to put in, but they didn't stand up in comparison to the other stories. So those kind of fell away. And coming to the question about how much I wanted to put into each story and not. I think it is very obvious, especially now when I speak to people who've read the book, and they're like, you can see where you hold back and you can see where you let go. And I think particularly in that section in Heartbreak, and I've seen some people who've read the book and who wrote reviews and were like, you didn't tell us everything, but you told us everything in the other section. So it feels wrong somehow. And I think when you're writing a memoir, you have to be so careful, because for me, yeah, you're writing a story that other people can read and they can take enjoyment from it. But it's also your life. And I'm very conscious of, I don't ever want to feel like I'm holding back from the reader, because I want the reader and me to feel like we have a connection and I'm opening up these doors to you. But I also have to think of like my mental health. I'm very always conscious of this. Like I need to think about, can I handle certain things? And am I ready to handle it? And I will be, I think, hopefully in the future. But at this point in my life, maybe I'm not ready to open up about that particular thing. But I felt like I needed to share with the reader that something changed in my life at that point. And it taught me empathy that you see in the next story and in the next story, and how I went a bit soft. And I got softer, and I felt like I was getting more softer. And this was kind of the catalyst. So I do say in the story, you don't know all the details. You don't need to know all the details, but you need to know that this affected me. And some readers are okay with that. Some are like, no, we need to know the details. What happened? Tell us now. Tell us everything. But I just didn't feel ready. And I feel like I will be, but not right now. I just it was too much. I had made myself so vulnerable in certain points, and I needed to know when I felt ready to put those things. So yeah.
I think there's like a very millennial angst that you refer to in the book, and it's the idea of running out of time, right? So what happens if you don't make the 30 under 30 list, or you're not the top 200 under 35? And it's this very real fear of running out of time, which is a reality, right? That a lot of people are worried about. And yet we see you sort of just like conquer that fear. So you go through it and you conquer it, right? So you start this degree, it doesn't work out, you then attempt another different degree, and it doesn't work out. And there's like this idea that we see you in the book sort of come to the realization that you can start over again, and that you can make yourself over and over again. And I'm really curious about what that experience was like. So going through it in person, but also writing that portion of your life story must have been really interesting for you. And so I want to know what that was like.
Yeah, also, I think what helped, I mean, you're saying it now and I'm thinking about it. What helped during that time was there wasn't a lot of pressure at that point for me to study. It was about me getting married. The pressure was about me getting married and finding a husband and having kids. That was like the whole thing. It wasn't about like uh you need to know what you're studying. You need to that was my own internal pressure on me. So I think when I was dropping out of degrees, and I was so upset about this because I was doing an architecture degree, because I'm a creative person, but I'm not a technical person. Give me numbers and I don't know what's going on. So I was like, all my buildings are going to fall down because I can design beautiful buildings, but they're not going to stand up. And so I dropped out of that. And then I dropped out of like an art degree because I was doing it through UNISA, and I couldn't do a fine art degree. I did it for 1 year. And then I was in Pietermaritzburg doing another kind of fine art degree at UKZN, and then dropped out of that. And so I was upset because I knew that my career is going to have an impact on my life. But I don't think really the people around me were too concerned. In the sense, they were more concerned that I wasn't finding someone to get married to, and that I was saying no to proposals. And I don't know what kept me going. If you're asking the question about like why I kept dropping out and going in and dropping out, it's like I had no other choice at that point. And also I was 18. Like at 18, you just like, I don't care. I'm gonna do it. I'll get up and go. I'll get up and go. You have that drive in you, I suppose. And it was hard, but that kind of situation played out all the time in my life continuously. Like you'd be told you can't do certain things, or you'd be rejected for something, and then you'd have to like build yourself up again from there. And so I feel like that incident was just a small moment in time preparing me for these bigger things, where I'd have to keep getting up again, getting up again, getting up again, and getting up again. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting that you speak about this, because one thing Alma and I really wanted to touch on, which I suppose is kind of a harder question, but we hope it won't be, is the idea of privilege. Reading the book, it was quite stark for me to think about, oh my gosh, like this person really has the privilege to, one, start again, but also the privilege to, travel the world. And I want to know if there was ever a moment in writing the book where that was a reflection for you, and a reflection that you wanted to have on paper. Because I left the book sort of being really wanting that, right? That little bit, just to be like, I'm grateful for all these opportunities, but I understand that I'm one of, a few people in the world who's able to start over again, who's able to travel, who's able to have all these writers' residencies and see the world. And what does that mean for me in this moment at this time?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely there. And I don't know, I always wonder if I've never like explained it, because I'm trying to make this a very fun book, and almost like try to find the joke everywhere. I don't think I fully um spoke about this, because definitely I'm in a privileged situation, and I get to travel. And even when I wasn't traveling, I wasn't allowed to travel I didn't travel by myself until I was like 30. I was definitely doing it with my parents. So I obviously had that, and that is something I think there could be space in the book to explore that. But it wasn't until I was trying so long to do it by myself. I don't think and I never went into it because it just felt like it was going to be too much to put it in the book. Um, Having these kind of discussions with my dad and arguments really about I need to go and do this by myself. And the first time I did it was going to volunteer at the school. So the school sort of was like, they'd look after you as long as you taught at the school. So getting there was up to me and my dad. But like the school would give you accommodation, food, or whatever. Um, and the residencies, um, they would pay for your accommodation and your food and stuff and all that when you were there. So those things made it easier to convince my dad about me going, because I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise if the residency wasn't paying for that. Like the Shanghai thing, they pay for your flights and they pay for your food, and then my dad would fly, and this is again a privilege thing, but he would fly to China because he wouldn't let me fly alone by myself. So he would fly to China, leave me there, or to the village. I was like, I need to go and teach in school. And so I always say I can't even resent him for not letting me do these things, because he would try in his own way. And I mean, that is a very valid discussion to be had in the book. Like, I've had these opportunities and I could eventually I could take those opportunities. And you're 100% right. I think it's something worth exploring, but I think within the context of this book and the way I was trying to write this book, it might not have fit in. So that's for the next book, I think.
I think it's interesting.
But this is an interesting discussion. I'd like to hear what you'll think about that answer, even, because it's good to have a discussion about it.
Well, I think that it was interesting, and I think it's something that Letokonolo and I spoke about. I mean, it was quite stark, right? That it was, I guess, the intersection of a lot of things, right? So intersection, I guess, of your upbringing, and maybe your father's religious views. The idea that even at 28, for example, you could get this right as residence, but you wouldn't be allowed to travel, and like, we see the shift in the book where, for example, you're 30 and you're traveling for the first time on your own. And there's like a shift in the ways in which travel then becomes a vehicle for you to become and unbecome as well. And so it becomes really stark, right, to see what it means to like not even be able to exert that kind of agency to say, I got this residency, I'm an adult, I was able to apply, get the visa, do all of these things, and I'm now wanting to travel, right? And so I guess that for me, it was an interesting vehicle to see the ways in which travel was used for you to become, but unbecome as well. And it's not just unbecoming for you, but also unbecoming for your father as well, because there's like an element of control that he has to let go of, and to trust you and believe that wherever you're going, you'll be okay, and you're going to not do things that he may not approve of, etc. So I found that was an interesting, not just in terms of privilege, but also in terms of the relationship between a father and a daughter, and his daughter, but also the becoming of your child as an adult and what that means for your relationship as a parent.
I think it's interesting because I wonder what your life would have looked like if it wasn't what it is, right? I wonder, particularly, I think about the renewed conversations. I mean, I suppose it's not renewed, but I think we're beginning to be more conscious of class politics in this country and around the world. So to think about, like, I mean, if I was entering the book and not having this discussion and I left the book, I would be like, hold up. Is this person realizing that they have the privilege to do these particular things because they may not have acknowledged it in the book? But as you say, because I would have entered the discussion differently now knowing that the decision to put certain stories in the book was because it was going to be a whimsical, fun, what is the funniest story? Mm-hmm. And maybe the privilege would have been a little too much or too serious in the context of the book. But so for me, it's that like now I'm appreciating the book a lot more than I did when I left it, because now I'm like, oh, okay, so the conversation about privilege was thought about, but it was like, it's maybe not for this book, it may be for another book.
Yeah, I think, like I said, within the context of this book, you know, I there's conversations to be had for sure, and this my whole life is not in this book, but like I said, maybe for the next book, because I did talk with someone about this book, and we were like, maybe because you didn't just keep it funny, you started putting in more deeper stories about empathy and personal stories and stuff. um, Maybe you could make it more nuanced, or maybe you could go into more research or detail about certain things. I mean, definitely. I just
So
think
I
within the
agree.
context of the structure of the way this book was done, I don't know if it would hold on its own.
Yeah, I think for me it was because you allowed the more difficult conversations to happen, right? So when the difficult conversation started, I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to get this conversation as well, like gearing yourself up. And I understand, and also at the same time, it's like, as you said in the beginning, perhaps this may have been one of the things that you were not ready to explore at the moment that you wrote the book, and that should be acceptable because it's your book. I wanted to speak about the title story. I think the title story is really, really like funny, but also very scary. And I wanted to know, I mean, at the moment, because you write the story as a reflection, but when it was happening, like what was going through your mind? Like I'm just imagining you the first time finding out that you are some beauty product in Canada or in China, and like you didn't even know. And one, you're not even getting royalties for any of those particular things. So how was that for you, particularly in the context of being an artist and knowing how screwed up like we don't get paid for our work.
Yeah, I mean, it changed. So in the beginning, when it happened, I was like, firstly, initially, just when it happened, I was shocked, right? Like, I mean, all these adverts for carpet cleaning and leading treks in Cambodia and I don't know, teeth whitening or whatever. I was shocked, but my immediate reaction was embarrassment and like, I'm so stupid. I did this and I've got to deal with it now. My reaction, especially during that time, was that I'm always the wrong one. So I was like, I did this stupid thing. I signed this document without reading it properly. I'm now paying the price and I'm just going to laugh it off because it's such a funny story. And I'm just going to treat it as a funny story. But then time started going. And firstly, I started getting older, started exposing myself to more stuff, reading more stuff, and the story started getting worse. So that I would see my picture with different names, and then I would see me giving testimonials for stuff I'd never tried, and then I'd see myself on dating websites, and then on foster care websites. So it started getting dangerous, and then I wasn't laughing so much, but I still was scared. I was like, I don't know if I ever put that across properly in the book, but I never really like. I just always took. I was like, I'm wrong. I'm always wrong, and this is I'm. I signed this document legally. It's just all wrong. And then when I started getting a bit older, and I was like, hey, like I think we've all been a bit exploited here. Um, Let me share the story on Twitter. Because other people need to know what happened to me in case this ever happens to them. And so this was a few years later, but I shared the story. You've read the book. The story kind of went viral, right? And at that point, I understood, maybe I was much more aware of how bad the situation was, how bad it was for so many of us in that situation. And we weren't paid for anything. And how we were exploited, we were taken advantage of, and it was all legal because we'd signed the document. And so now I use it more as a cautionary tale for anyone who's going to sign anything, especially like now with Instagram and photographers and the current situation we're in, with everyone wanting to put their photo everywhere. um, so like now, but initially it was a whole range of emotions. That was like 2000 and I don't know, 9 or something. From that point, I was like embarrassed, laughing, making it a funny story, and I can still laugh about it now. But I think I understand the situation much more fully now, and I'm just glad I was lucky that it was never in any terrible situation where I found that photo, because it could have been, because I signed away the rights for them to um, change the picture, change the name. I'd given away all those rights. So in that sense, I was really lucky that that didn't happen. Yeah.
I think location in this book is particularly important, and there's two places that stand out quite a lot. And I think there's two places in which we see you unbecome, but we also see you become. And New York is one of those places. And I think, you speak in the book about initially just not having very high expectations of New York, but there's something that's transformative that happens to you when you're there. And I'm interested in places, I'm interested in the idea of places as a location for internal change, for personal change. And so I wanted to know if you could just speak a little bit to the experience of New York and why that was so transformative for you. I think you touched on it briefly, but there's such a beautiful story in the book and the ways in which we see you become in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is linked to that thing about wanting to travel. So you must remember, I live in Durban my whole life, right? I'm 36. I've lived in Durban. And Durban is not, I love Durban, but it's a love-hate relationship. It's not a place where creativity is nurtured. So if you want to go out, if you go out of Durban, even in Joburg, Cape Town, there's still things happening. There's still groups of people you can join. You can have the kind of conversations you want to have. I don't always find that happening in Durban here, right? So sometimes it frustrates me. And I've lived here my whole life, and I didn't expect to be living here my whole life. So when I went to New York and I was, it's just out of that, after that heartbreak section, I was 30 and my father and I were arguing a lot about me traveling by myself. And I was like, I can do it. And he's like, as a woman, you're not allowed to do it. And I was like, I can do it. And he's like, as a woman, you're not allowed to be having that conversation it was such a long conversation. I don't think I expressed in the book how long that conversation was. And the heartbreak thing happened, and I suddenly was doing this by myself, and it's New York. And my mind sort of just blew open because I was at the right point in my life, I think, to take it in. And I was alone, and I say, you're in a city and you're in a place where you need your heart to be fixed. So everything was just shocking to me. Everything was mesmerizing. The subway system, the skyscrapers, the sound, the people. I just was kind of absorbing it all in, which I think anybody, if you go to New York, is. But I think particularly at that point in my life, was it just blew me away, and I didn't expect it to. My sister always says, happiness is when reality exceeds your expectations. So you must keep your expectations low. And I didn't have much expectation for New York when I went. I was like, I got accepted for the writing residency. I don't care that it's in New York, but they've accepted me and it's for a month. I mean, I would be stupid if I didn't take it. So I'm going. But the city just surprised me. And it happened just at that point in my life when things were starting to change. And I always feel like everything happens for a reason and happens the way it should. So, and then it started snowing, and then the people was nice to me. And I'm not saying the people are always nice in New York, but at that point they were nice to me. And it just felt like a small cog in the wheel when I was feeling particularly stuck because I turned 30. I didn't have a job properly. I was doing freelance work, but I wasn't getting married. The person I wanted to get married to, it didn't work out. And I felt very, very stuck. And that city happened at that point in my life when I was feeling stuck, and it blew the door open in a way. So yeah, so the cities do play a part. And then I talk about how in Shanghai I found softness at the right point. And so the cities do definitely play a part in the trajectory of my life.
I mean, I love New York. So when I was reading the sections about New York, particularly when you had low expectations and you blew your mind, I often tell people when I was like, whatever expectations you have about New York, it is that and so much more. Because in many ways, I feel like New York, you meet yourself because it's so freeing and so amazing. One of the stories that I really, really appreciated about a place is Istanbul. I suddenly want to go to Istanbul like yesterday because and it's in the section about softness, but I think in a different context. I think in Istanbul, what you allow the reader to get to know is that the place itself has so much character. You spoke about the idea of I didn't want to travel by car. I just wanted to walk. like the idea of I wanted to experience the native Turkey and not the tourist Turkey, because it's in the native Turkey that I will be able to find the magic of the place. And I wanted to speak about that, right? Just the idea of like location as a form of healing, and how in Istanbul there is a part where you speak about like being a mom for a particular moment, and it was momentary and it needed to be momentary, but it was healing in that sense. So to think about place, and particularly Istanbul, and what it meant for you in terms of healing and learning softness.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said something about like, you know, you meet yourself when in certain places, you know, and then so like in New York I felt like I met myself because I was alone, so I could figure out who I am without people around me, you know. Okay, so for instance, like when I travel with my family, we pray 5 times a day, right? But when I was in New York, I was like, oh, well, I pray 5 times a day. Who am I? I got to figure it out now. Like I got to make the choices. What will I wear? Am I going to dress like a Muslim because I'm in this community all the time, or am I going to wear different things? You know, and you're like, I'm going to see myself for the first time. But that's what I don't talk about it. But when you travel by yourself, you want to see who you are, because then you're like, who am I? You know, what will my choices be in a different place? And so in New York, that was like meeting yourself that you talk about. But in Istanbul, it was, again, if you can walk in a place, and I talk a little bit about that later on in the book. If you can walk in a place, you can understand something about the place. And New York was very similar to Istanbul in that sense for me, because I could just walk everywhere, and we're not used to, as South Africans, we're not used to walking everywhere. We're not used to walking in our cities. Like you know, like to be able to cross the street and go to a shop and just like to walk without care. There's a lot of um self I don't know, there's just a lot of beauty in it, because you can take in your surroundings and you can understand how you react to your surroundings. I don't think I'm saying this right, but that's why I'm a writer and I'm not a speaker. But in Istanbul, it reminded me of New York, just because it was there was always the possibility of something around the corner. There's always something happening. So you'd look up in a building and you'd be like, I wonder what's happening in that building. I wonder what's happening in that street. I wonder what's happening here. I wonder who's that. I wonder, like, there's so much of like anything that you can throw yourself into and disappear into. And I needed that at that point in my life. And so in Istanbul, I think the title of that chapter is I Fell in Love in Istanbul, or I Lost My Heart in Istanbul, because it was such a clash, and a beautiful clash of like East meets West. And you've got this old sections of you know, old Istanbul with the mosques, and I'd go and pray in the mosques, and then you get the like very European side. And I just felt like they'd kept their heritage and they'd kept their history, and that was so important to me, to be in a place where you feel the history of a place, you know. And that was just healing, to walk in a space openly and to feel free in that space. And then, yeah, you should visit Istanbul. It's amazing.
One day when we're all vaccinated and we can travel again, and certain countries aren't hoarding vaccines, but that's a different conversation. Um, so actually, I'm so curious about the relationship between fiction and nonfiction, right? And I think particularly for writers as well, you know, there's almost an attitude in this country where people seem to think that fiction isn't real writing, or that fiction doesn't require as much serious reading as, for example, nonfiction does. And you've now done both, and so I'm curious about how the one has lent from the other, or what having previously written fiction has meant for your writing of this book now.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't want to say I'm a nonfiction writer, because I still feel like, you know, with memoir, I still feel like I was writing about myself, so it doesn't feel like nonfiction. You know, I'm telling the story. I'm still finding the story, how to tell you the story about myself. So I don't know if I can talk about nonfiction. I still feel like a fiction writer, but uh, just in terms of writing the two, with fiction, I felt it was harder to write, just because I'm kind of like a natural writer, where I just see where the characters go. So I don't plan things, and that's why it takes me very long to write things. So I'd be like, oh, what will the character do now? How will they react to the situation? Let me think. And whereas with nonfiction, I mean, it was a story in my mind that already had happened, and I didn't need to think too much about the characters. So in that sense, I just found it easier with the memoir. But with the fiction, I enjoy it more because it's kind of like swimming. It's languid. You can find what you need to pull out. You can look at it, admire, think, do I want to put it in? No, I'm going to leave it behind. Do I want to put this in? Oh, this looks good. Let me try it out, And with nonfiction, you really are held by the truth of things, whereas fiction, you can hide a lot. And I like that.
I think about, Istanbul has a special place in my heart. I'm thinking particularly about your flight and how you were sitting next to an old woman and she didn't speak English, you didn't speak Turkish, but you were having this conversation. And thinking about like the beauty of like just communication without necessarily words, or understanding each other and how we exist in the world. And you speak about how she took out a nut out of her pocket and gave it to you, and you instantly understood what that meant, right? And how you speak about like these sort of souvenirs that you've collected. And I want to speak about that, right? These little gifts that you have taken along the way. And do you, particularly in the pandemic, has there been moments where you've opened, let's call it this proverbial box, and just think about all those memories and where the stone that you picked up and the moment you picked it up and how you felt? And yeah, so I'm interested in that.
Yeah, so when I used to travel, because now we don't know when that's going to happen, but when I used to travel, I'd collect the little stones and feathers or leaves or something to remind me of that place. Um, I I During the pandemic, I took down the box and looked at the stuff mainly because I was writing the book, and I always think they're nice memories of that moment. And especially it's important to me like that they're tactile and you can touch them and you can feel them, as opposed to looking to photos. It's very flat, and I like the idea of these things that you can hold in your hands for the memories. And yeah, I mean, I still have the box. I still keep the things, and I'm hoping that I'll be collecting more things. But those things must mean for me a connection. So it's not like random. I wouldn't just want to pick up anything. I was having a particular thought. Like when I was in Kashmir, I picked up chinar leaf. They have these. It's a famous tree, the chinar tree, with that particular four or five leaves. And it was winter, and I was walking down the street, and I had this memory of this moment um, of someone. And it was raining, and it was very cold and overcast. And I looked down, saw the leaf, picked it up. So those collections of those things are related to very particular memories to me, and they're always about connection. I think the main things about my travels is to remind me about connection and who we connect with. Yeah.
I think that something that stood out as well in terms of connection was the teaching experience. So when you were in Pakistan and you were teaching, and there's an experience that you have with those children that I found particularly moving, because I think we often think of giving back as what other people who we give back to receive, but there is a change, and there are ways in which you are changed for having given back, right, and for having done that work. And I found that to be one of the most beautiful moments in the book, was to see how you went to that school thinking that you would teach, but how you were taught so much by those children. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about what is quite a tender moment in the book.
I want to say from the beginning, I didn't feel like I was giving back or anything. I'm not going to be like, oh, I went there and I did so much for these kids. Like that, it wasn't like, no. I went there, and I think I say it at some point in the book. I went there because I was trying to find myself, and I was feeling like life was passing me by, and I needed this opportunity to figure out who I was. And so honestly, there were other volunteers who were definitely there to help teach those kids and to give of themselves. I was there to figure out who I was and have this experience on the mountain. And I definitely met volunteers who did amazing work there. But I didn't expect the kids to affect me so much. And so, because I went there with the intention of like, you're going to learn to be an adult, you're going to learn to be on your own, you're going to learn to do like big girl things, you know. Um, but when I went there and I met these kids, and they were just so great because they weren't good schools in the area, so they'd come to that particular school. So some of them would walk up for 2 hours up the mountain to get to that school because the quality of education was so good at that school. Um, and they were just like so energetic. They wanted to learn. They always were asking questions, and they always were had the most interesting questions, like things I wouldn't think about because now you live on a mountain, and they want to know like uh what is space and what are stars. And these are some of the kids hadn't seen cars before, you know. They didn't even know what a car was, and I'm trying to explain the concept of the galaxy and stars and planets, you know. And so it was interesting for me. I just felt like I kept on learning from them and learning how to teach them. And they were so giving, you know. They, if I was like on a horse and I was going up, they would come make sure like I'm not going to fall down, or let me help you, ma'am. And some of those students are still they're on Instagram now, and they still call me ma'am. And this was 2013 now, so they're quite big, and they're like, ma'am, how are you, ma'am, it's so good to see you, ma'am. They're big now, so it's funny to me. But yeah, they were just so loving, and they didn't want us to leave. And so like that was the most heartbreaking part for me. um they would be like, please stay, please stay, please stay, please stay. Like they were just so open about their emotions. I don't know, like I think we pretend so much. It was so nice to see, like they would just like, please ma'am, stay, you know, like, can't you stay? And it was heartbreaking also because they loved you so much. And I understood why the rule at that school was you could volunteer for 3 months minimum. You had to be there for longer because these kids make an attachment with you and they might never see you again, you know. And that was a stage in 2013 when there was very erratic internet and stuff. You didn't even know you were going to see these kids on Instagram later. I'm shocked I see them on Instagram now. But at that point, you thought you're never going to see them again in your life. This is going to be like just this point in my life when I met these kids. So yeah, the kids were just the absolute best part of the village. I thought it was going to be about me learning to become an adult, but it was really about how meaningfully interactive those kids were with you. Yeah.
I like that so much. There's a comment from Senzo on YouTube. Shubnum, I'm really inspired by just listening to your story, and it just makes me want to get your book and start reading immediately. And they continue to say, but what stands out for me in this conversation is just the experience you go through of failure in a way of having to drop out of several degrees and having to pick yourself up and start again. I mean, speaking about wonderful things that happen, your book is also going to be published in India. Congratulations. So I want to speak a little bit about that, right? Like, how has that experience been? And just like, you know, often, and that your story is going to be told in another part of the world, and how are you feeling about that?
I mean, it's exciting. I'm happy. I I I think you know, I knew that there might be a market for it in the Indian market because Onion Tears had also been sold there, and I knew there were a few people in India who wanted to read the story, and I think it would resonate with readers there as well because I do talk about like growing up in an Indian family and sort of like being the daughter, and so I did think they would like that book, and yeah, it's a big market, so I'm excited about it. I'm excited what people think will think about it, particularly because I write from a very South African perspective, and as a South African traveler, and as you know, applying for visas as a South African, and this and that, and saying in the book that I didn't feel particularly Indian when I was in India and I couldn't speak the language, you know, and I struggled there. I'm interested to see what readers that's I think about that because yeah.
So, I mean, we know that the book is going to be published in India, which is amazing. But we've seen a few interesting tweets of yours about what you may potentially be working on next. So, what is to follow, and what can we look forward to in the future?
I'm working on a novel. It's a magic realism novel set in an abandoned house in Durban. And it's about a young girl who moves into the house and discovers all these strange characters living there, and about this mystery that happened there 100 years ago and why this house was abandoned. So it's it's an interesting. I think it's something different for me. It's completely different from Onion Tears. It's more creepy, I would think. There's a jinn involved in the story as well. Um, and that's what I'm working on. We're trying to finalize it now and then submit, hopefully. And I'm working on small micro memoirs, which is like these small memories. I've been living with my parents for so long, incredibly long time. um, it's very interesting as we get older how our relationships change, and how I'm not the girl who asks questions all the time now, and they're not the strict parents anymore, and we have more like conversations. And so these micro memoirs look at those little tiny moments of us living together for so long, and me observing their relationship while remaining single. Like they're nearly married for nearly 50 years now. Um, so I think that's a very interesting situation that I want to try to like crack open like an egg. And so I'm writing these small moments, and I hope to make that into a collection. And so those are the two things I'm working on currently. Yeah.
I mean, those sound really exciting. Like, I'm excited for the novel, but I'm also excited for this micro memoir because
Micro memoirs, yeah.
I'm always interested in how, when my mom passed away, I spent a lot of time grieving the fact that I never got to know her as a person. Like, she's always been my mom, and I never got to know her history or who she was before she became my mom. So I would be interested to finding out how you relate to your parents as lovers before they are your parents, and how that relationship changes. So I'm really excited for that. There's another comment from Facebook. I'm very excited about SK getting published in India. I think the book will resonate within that market. The possibilities are endless. I mean, we could speak all evening about like this book. But if you have any questions as listeners, any comments, please, if you want to give Shubnum her flowers, please, this is your opportunity. We'll share it on screen. I wanted to talk a little bit about your drawings as well. Like, I mean, I want to talk about that. Like, a little bit. Tell us more about that. I think it's something that we really don't talk about often. But just how how often do you do it? And would we ever get a collection of just like, or rather, a coloring book of just the drawings?
I want to do that coloring book just to make some money. And I hear coloring books are the way to make money. But in terms of my art, it's really about putting yourself out there. So it was Carol Mashigo, Mohala Mashigo, she was working on a book, Intruders, and she put up a tweet saying, "Oh, I can imagine like drawings going with these the book that I'm working on." And I immediately tweeted back, and I was like, I wasn't an illustrator at the time, but I was like, I'd love to do the drawings for this, And I really think this is a story to tell people, like, put yourself out there as much as you can, because then the opportunities come. And she said, yeah, like, why don't we like discuss this? And we talked about it. And then I ended up doing the 3 illustrations for inside and for the cover, which I was shocked. I didn't think that was going to happen. And then from that point, I started doing a few more covers for other publishers. And that's when I started doing book illustrations and book covers, Um, I did for Sakiso Awana's book. I think because you put it up on the page and I saw it and I was like, I drew that cover, the maiden essay cover.
Oh, yes.
And everyone is frozen, so I don't know if I'm still going.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna. Yeah, so I did the illustration for that one. And so I'm going on, although everybody looks a little bit frozen. And so I've been doing the illustrations for those, and I really think it's about putting yourself out there that these things happen, because if I didn't put that tweet and it sort of snowballed from there, that wouldn't have happened. And so I do the book illustrations and I do private commission drawings, but a lot of my art has to do with transformation and breaking up. So a lot of the drawings you'll see is a woman being like, either like her chest opening up with all these flowers, because I really believe in softness. I really believe in finding that softness within, or what does that mean for transformation and identity? And so if you have like dots or broken up pieces being built up again, because I do think we're always in the process of being whole and then broken up and being whole and broken up. And so this is important in my art. But when I'm drawing, I can't write. And when I'm writing, I can't draw. So I haven't been drawing for a while because I was working on this book and I'm trying to work on the next novel. And I find I can't do them simultaneously because they both take a different type of creativity to do. And I need to focus on only that one at one time. And everyone is frozen again. So I'm
we can still hear
us?
Okay.
I suppose before we run off, one final question is like, what do you hope people get from how I accidentally became a global stock photo?
I love that we're ending off on that question because this is important to me. I really want people to follow their own path, because people will always tell you what to do and how to be and how to do things. And I just want people to be themselves. And I just want people to know that you can do it and that it's difficult. From young, everyone was always telling me to get married and have kids and be this way and be that way. And I think I would have if I wasn't somebody who grew up on books and reading so much. I think that changed the way I thought, really. I just want people to read these stories and remember that magic in you, and remember to fight for who you need to be. And that when you do, wonderful things can happen and doors can open. And it might not feel like that in the moment, but when you do, and when you're true to yourself, the world just like blooms in color. And I can tell you from 10 years ago, I was sitting and crying because I wasn't getting married. I wasn't having kids. I wasn't traveling. I was like, what is the point of my life? I don't have a job. I don't have a career. What is the point? And I'm sitting here 10 years later talking on this amazing podcast show, Chicky Natives, about my book with my cover on it, sitting like a queen on the cover. And you know what? I did it and I'm happy. And I'm happy with who I am now. And I've done things, like I want people to know that when they read the book, to know you can make things happen, especially girls, but just like it can happen with time, so that's what I hope they get. And yeah.
This has been awesome. Oh, we actually have a comment here from James Mura, who's a Cheeky Natives fave. We love James. And says, Shubnum is the ultimate triple threat, writer of great fiction and non-fiction, as well as artist. We salute you. And I think that is an amazing way to end off what's been a really great discussion. Congratulations on having your second book out. It's no small feat. And we really look forward to what will come next after this, but also to having your book in different markets. I think it's going to do so well in the markets in India. And yeah, we can't wait to see what your second novel, when it comes out. We look forward to reading it as well.
Thank you so much. And it's just been an honor to be here. The work you're both do is absolutely great. And we're so lucky to have you. So thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations once again on everything. And we wish you all the best for your novel. I think we both are looking forward to getting some, magical realism in Durban. And to everyone else joining us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, thank you once again for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. If you are not following Shubnum, please follow her on social media. And yes, and obviously very important, go and buy the book. Not ask for a PDF. No. Buy the book. Buy the book. That is, if you do that, and if you buy it, just tag us and be like, hey, Chickenators, I got it. So we can see that you bought the book. So until next time, bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you.